This is day 284, How to Treat People. I've decided to dig deep and come up with my top 10 principles that guide or should guide my life. These are the principles that I've collected throughout my life. So for the next 10 days, I'm going to identify and explain the source of the core principles that govern the way I look at life. As I sat down to do this, I was shocked at how difficult this is to do. You would think that we all know the principles that guide our lives, right? Well, actually, no. We do not think of them that often. Sitting down to contemplate this has been an exercise in exploration. I realized that some of these were more influential on me than others. Some are more practical and usable on a daily basis, and others are more theoretical and aspirational. So this is my attempt at identifying core principles that govern who I am and who I aspire to be. Principle 1, treat people as they should be, not as they are. This principle has roots in several areas. The first time I came across this idea was during a speech by the Reverend Jesse Jackson in the 1984 Democratic National Convention. My parents would make me watch both political party conventions, and I would be naturally drawn to the great speakers. Jesse Jackson, albeit a little questionable in his political policy narrative, was definitely one of the better speakers over the last 50 years in American politics. During that speech, he said something to the effect, "Because I tell you, you cannot hold someone in the ditch unless you linger there with them, unless you linger there." He was referring to his claim that the Democrat Party needed to appeal to the underrepresented minorities in the southern states, which, as it turns out, was a rather prophetic thing to stake a claim on. For some reason, that phrase struck with me, and I thought about that concept. How do you really help another person if that is what you choose to do? I'm not saying that Mr. Jackson was right, but he definitely caused me to take a pause and think this through. A few years later, while trying to read through Faust by the German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, I came across a similar concept that formalized this principle even further. The poem is hard to read as it is translated from 18th century German and written in a poetic style that is foreign to the average American. The story of Faust is quite an incredible story of tragedy and redemption. I think Faust is a must read and would put this in my top 10 readings of all time. In this story, there is a deal struck in the premortal existence between the Lord and Mephistopheles regarding the person to be born who would be known as Faust. The essentials of the deal are that Faust will be given control over Mephistopheles to do what he wants, to use him however he will, to gain power and fame and anything else. In return, Faust will forfeit his soul. We have heard this same story many times and in many forms, which is why Faust is such an important read. Not sure if Goethe was the origin of this dramatic formula of tragedy, but he certainly is the origin of it in this modern age. Faust has a lifetime of success and failure, but always seems to strive to do better. Tragedy does strike in his relationship with Gretchen. She ends up pregnant with a child, and after being abandoned by Faust, who is striving for greatness, is driven mad, and she and the baby die. Faust is tormented by guilt. The story ends with Mephistopheles laying claim to a soul, but then the Lord intercedes and grants Faust a pardon. During the second act of this long poem and play, the Lord, through a chorus of angels, provides some foreshadowing on the eventual outcome of the story. This is translated loosely, by the way. Whoever strives in ceaseless toil, him we may grant redemption. And if a man in his own dust will always persevere, then shall the light from above reach him. Remember, this was not written by God or even by angels, but by Goethe, the poet. You almost forget that fact as you dive into his writing. It almost feels as if you're uncovering ancient text that reveals the origins of the universe in a way that Goethe writes. The basic concept is that as long as humans strive to do right, despite their failures, then redemption will come. I guess there is hope for me. Ceaseless toil definitely describes my journey. Buried in this writing is an ethic, a principle, if you will, on how you should treat and deal with other members of our kind. Despite all of our frailties, selfish tendencies, and poor decisions, we all have the option and ability for redemption. I'm not sure who came up with this quote, but there is a phrase attributed to Goethe that summarizes this concept rather eloquently. If you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as he were, what he ought to be and what he could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. This is probably not a direct quote, rather a summary of the concepts in one or more of his essays, but the point is clear. Due to the fact that we are all as Faust, we can all be redeemed. We should view the fellow members of our human family with this eye and treat them the way they could be. Just as Mr. Jackson referenced, we can get down in the ditch with someone and lift them out by treating them as we see them becoming, rather than treating them as we see them now. A marvelous concept, and albeit altruistic and far-reaching, has practical aspects as well. When you are working with others in life and in business, if you remember this concept, you can elevate your interaction from people to move away from reacting to what they do and say to more aspirational appeal. People will gravitate towards another person that shares a joint vision of their mutual improvement, regardless of their present state of affairs. So this concept has become a meditation for my life and my treatment of others and the view I will take of my own self. Redemption, you see, is always around.